U.S. is the global leader in geothermal production, with about 4 gigawatts of capacity installed, 4 gigawatts of our 1,200 for the entire electrical system in the U.S.
Some estimates place U.S. electricity demand on track to grow 25% by 2030 and 78% by 2050.
You fast forward 25 years to today, we lead the world in oil production, natural gas production. We transformed ourselves from the largest importer of natural gas to the largest exporter. As the shale revolution continues to get more efficient, some of those people will naturally move into geothermal. Most of the folks that are making wage right now in geothermal came out of oil and gas. So I think we have an existing workforce, but we're also going to need to develop the next workforce.
Hey, everybody, and welcome once again to Power Perspectives. I'm Kinsey Grant Baker. Let's jump in. Geothermal has been part of the energy conversation for decades, but it's often treated as hyper niche, location constrained, perpetually 5 years away. The list goes on. I'm curious though, does that list of reasons why not to go hard on geothermal change when we reckon with the fact that some estimates place U.S. electricity demand on track to grow 25% by 2030 and 78% by 2050? And what about when we consider that there's now a double-digit number of next-generation geothermal projects underway in the U.S., according to new data from the EIA? When we're facing a demand spike, even a hypothetical one of that magnitude, and when tech is deploying in a real way, could it be time to change the narrative around geothermal? Today, we're exploring the case for geothermal and why this year is already shaping up to be huge for the technology. And when I say huge, I mean it. Already, geothermal startup Fervo Energy has filed for an IPO after raising some $1.5 billion since 2017 to build the world's largest enhanced geothermal system in Utah. Zanskar, which uses AI to help developers identify potential geothermal hotspots, just raised a $115 million Series C, and geothermal startup Sage Geosystems just closed a $97 million Series B, led by conventional geothermal giant Ormat, with plans to build a commercial-scale project at one of their existing power plants. And all of this actually happened in 1 week. 1 week in late January. So to help us break down the reality of geothermal, from innovations to challenges and everything in between, I am thrilled to welcome Kyle Haustveit, 16th Assistant Secretary for the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Fossil Energy, now the Hydrocarbons and Geothermal Energy Office. Kyle, welcome to Power Perspectives. How are you today?
Kinsey, thank you for having me. I'm doing well. You kicked it off well. I think you touched on the exciting start to the year and what many believe will be the geothermal decade.
Yeah.
So thanks for
I
having me.
love you putting it that way. The geothermal decade, what a way to start this conversation, because this really does feel like a specific moment in time where we're seeing all this innovation, we're seeing all this excitement. And so I want to kind of parse through what all of that means. Before we do that, I'd love to start with your background really briefly. Can you tell me just a bit more about your role and maybe some of your team's priorities at the Department of Energy?
Yeah, absolutely. I was born and raised in North Dakota. I'll go back a ways quickly and fell in love with energy. My family's farm was just a few miles from the first oil well drilled in North Dakota. So I naturally was attracted to that business. My grandpa drilled wells in North Dakota, which led to a degree in petroleum engineering. Joining an unconventional oil and gas company, Devon Energy, to start my career really helped to set the stage for the passion and excitement I have around geothermal. And the reason is because 25 years ago, the US was running out of oil and natural gas. And there was a resource in place in tight rock that nobody thought was commercially available. Well, thanks to industry, thanks to our incredible national labs, we cracked that code first with natural gas in the Barnett Shale, and later in the Bakken and Eagle Ford for oil, and now the Permian Basin, of course. But the U.S. leveraged horizontal wells and multi-stage stimulation to overcome a technical obstacle, and that obstacle was a resource is in place, and it lacks the natural permeability to produce at commercial rates. So I start there because you fast forward 25 years to today, we lead the world in oil production, natural gas production, and we transformed ourselves from the largest importer of natural gas to the largest exporter. If we take that same problem statement that we had 25 years ago for unconventional oil and gas, you can copy and paste it to geothermal. We have an incredible resource in place. The world's demand for electricity is climbing by the day, and we have a resource that lacks the natural permeability to produce at commercial rates. So we're seeing companies go develop this hot rock resource with horizontal wells and multi-stage stimulation. And they do that so they can eliminate the risk of a dry hole. Historically, hydrothermal, geothermal, or conventional, if you're talking oil and gas terms, we'll think of it as conventional versus unconventional resource requiring stimulation to access that hot rock. Uh, what happens with conventional is the risk of a dry hole is, somewhere in the 1 to 3, 1 to 4. So every fourth well you drill, there's nothing that comes out of it. It's a goose egg on your financials. Well, capital doesn't like uncertainty. So I think that's part of the reason that for years, geothermal has lived in this niche position. There hasn't been enough certainty for the investment, and there hasn't been enough scale to attract major investment. A lot of the projects leading up to where we're at today had been single digit or tens of megawatts. And you mentioned in the opener, Fervo's developing a 500 megawatt development. And to put that into perspective for the audience, the US is the global leader in geothermal production with about 4 gigawatts of capacity installed, 4 gigawatts of our 1,200 for the entire electrical system in the US. So a very small percentage, 4%. And it hasn't grown significantly for decades. And it's really hard to grow something at scale if you're adding tens of megawatts at a time. So what the next gen geothermal is allowing us to do is eliminating the risk of a dry hole. That's the first one. And we eliminate the risk because the operators are in charge of creating the connectivity between the wells. And number two is this method of development is going to provide tremendous scale opportunities. I think we're going to see many gigawatts of new geothermal projects come online. So how that ties back in, the last couple of years I worked in private sector, we got to stand up a venture capital team and we looked at kind of two pathways. One was technologies that benefited the core business. The other one was energy addition opportunities that could leverage the technical skill sets that our company had developed over the last 25 years. And that led us right down the pathway to enhanced geothermal. After joining the department, had the great honor of welcoming the geothermal team into our office, and it's now a headline. You mentioned the new office name includes geothermal in the name of the office because we believe in it. We think it's significant. It's going to play a vital role in the future of U.S. energy and global energy. And some of the things that we've done in recent weeks include prioritizing cost competitive gigawatt scale power generation. So there's a lot of applications for geothermal. They're all great, but for our office, we need to focus our time, our people, and financial resources on the area that we think will have the largest impact for America and for the globe. And we think that is gigawatt scale power generation. And we specifically highlight cost competitive. This is not intended to be a long-term subsidized industry. It has the technical feasibility to be standalone, competitive in power generation. And the beauty of geothermal is it's always on. There's very few energy forms that are zero carbon emitting and are always available. I mean, you really look at nuclear and geothermal that check those boxes. So it's such an incredible form of energy. The US is blessed with a vast amount of resource. And part of the reason that we're focusing on it is because it's filling a critical need right now. So the last thing I'll mention before we move on to the next topic is we announced $171.5 million just last week to fund two topic areas. Those two topic areas are critical to advancing scaled geothermal. First one is field demonstrations. To your point, there's been niche work, laboratory work that's been critical for years that have helped us develop new bit technology, new high temperature tools, new cement. That work was instrumental. Things like Forge, another DOE funded field test site. But now it's time to go put those technologies to work and develop a resource so that we can start to understand what it looks like in the field. What are the challenges so we can go solve the next set of problems that will limit the potential of scaling US and global geothermal. And the second topic area is resource characterization. Probably the largest difference between the US shale revolution and what I think can happen with geothermal is we don't have as much subsurface information where the highest quality geothermal potential exists, much of which is in the western US, where the plates collided to build the Rockies, thinned the crust, and allowed that temperature to come up to shallower depths. We just don't have hundreds of thousands of wells drilled into the subsurface in that part of our country like we did with oil and gas. virtually all of our major oil and gas unconventional plays sit on top of conventional plays. And that was important because we had 100 years worth of log data, seismic data. We really understood where that resource was. We don't have that same benefit today in geothermal. So that's why topic area 2 that we're funding is focused on resource characterization to go partner with industry to help reduce the risk of going out and drilling these pseudo wildcat wells in the Western US.
Yeah, I mean, what an incredible primer to this conversation to understanding geothermal in the big picture, Kyle. This is really really helpful. It has inspired many questions for me that we'll dig into now. But I think the first one that comes to mind. So let's talk a little bit about some of the maybe the technical challenges, roadblocks, innovations that need to happen to get where we want to get. Assuming advancements in geothermal technology, I understand the Department of Energy predicts geothermal could generate 60 gigawatts, nearly 10% of US electricity by 2050. That's a very significant chunk. I'm curious what needs to happen to get to that point. What are some of the sort of check marks that need to be checked, the boxes that need to be checked in terms of technology and technological advancements when we're trying to get to that point? I imagine that the field demos, the resource characterization, that $171.5 million plays a big role in that. But what else do we need to get to that version of reality where geothermal could be 10% of US electricity by 2050?
That's a great question. I, there's probably more, but I'll start with three. We'll start below ground. S- We really need to make sure that we understand the long term thermal response between these wells. So for those not familiar with enhanced geothermal, and that's where I'm spending most of the time. There's other methods that people are pursuing, and we encourage it. Again, we're not picking a winner or picking a technology. We're driving an outcome, and our outcome is cost competitive gigawatt scale geothermal power production. So that whichever technology can deliver that, we are rooting for that technology. But again, our job is to drive the outcome. So one important thing to drive that outcome is to attract investment. And I mentioned earlier in the opening statement that to attract investment, we need certainty. And certainty requires iterations, it requires data. And one of the most important data points is the thermal decline. So with enhanced geothermal, you drill at least two wells. Normally it's a alternating series of injectors and producers. You hydraulically stimulate that rock, you break it with water and hold it open with sand. You then inject water into one well. It moves across those fractures and it heats up. It's kind of like having a frying pan that you put water on. Right? That frying pan is the hot rock surface area. Then you're warming up that water. So it moves from the injector to the producer and it warms up during that process. What we don't know is what does the thermal sweep efficiency look like? So how long does it take to start cooling the rock down between those two wells? How even is that thermal sweep? Believe it or not, it's pretty chaotic downhole when you're pumping water and sand at thousands of psi and 100 plus barrels per minute. And you're shooting explosives to shoot holes in the casing. There's natural deformation in the subsurface with faults and fractures. So there's a lot of things that go on below the ground that limit our ability to control exactly how those fractures connect to our wells. So the first one below ground is we really need to understand the thermal decline because that thermal decline rate is what's going to impact the cash flow profile. The cash flow profile is what's going to attract or scare off investors. So we need to get more long-term cross-flow tests between injectors and producers so we understand the thermal decline, which drives the cash flow profile. So if we come up 10,000 feet and we're back on surface, the next area that we really need to focus on advancing to scale geothermal is on we'll just call it broad brush, maximizing net megawatts sold. So we want to put megawatts on the grid. That's the goal. And we want to maximize that. And there's a few ways to do it. The first one is the thermal to electric conversion. The most likely type of power plant for next gen geothermal at these lower temps, that 2 to 300 degree centigrade range, will be organic Rankine cycle plants where you produce your hot water, you flow it through a heat exchanger that contacts a working fluid that has a lower boiling point, like an isopentane, and that working fluid expands. It turns from a liquid to a gas, and that expansion increases the pressure, which turns the turbine. That's what generates the electrons and provides that to the grid. From that point forward, you need to cool that working fluid back down so it turns back into a liquid. So you're just repeating this process. You keep that working fluid in a closed loop system. It goes from liquid phase to gas phase and back and forth. You then take the hot water you produce that you've remove a portion of the heat from and you re-inject it in the injector so that water continues to move through the subsurface system. But right now, we're only seeing 10 to 15% thermal to electric conversion. So for the energy contained in that barrel of hot water, only about 10 to 15% of that is being converted into electrons. There are technologies that we need to continue to support to increase the thermal conversion. And within that net megawatt umbrella, we can also improve upon the parasitic load. So this is the energy consumed by the system to run the operation. Two of the largest parasitic loads in the system include the ACCs, the air cool condensers that cool that isopentane or that working fluid back from a gas to a liquid. And then the other parasitic load is the injection. You're injecting tens of thousands of barrels potentially per well per day, and that takes a lot of energy. So finding ways to improve the cooling process for our working fluid to take it from gaseous phase back to liquid, and then reducing frictional uh, pressure drops in the injection process can also reduce the parasitic load. And again, the ultimate goal is to maximize net megawatts. That's going to continue to drive the cost down and drive us towards the goal of cost competitive power generation. Third one, we've all heard about the interconnect queue. So we talked about subsurface. How do we do that more efficiently, provide certainty and what that thermal profile, profile looks like for investors? How do we get the most bang for our buck out of converting that to the resource that people want? And then step three is we need to get that resource to the customer. And you do that normally through the grid. And right now, the interconnect queue in different parts of the country is extremely long and challenging and expensive. So we need to find opportunities to accelerate the interconnect queue, prioritize large loads that have high capacity factors. The department, FERC, several people have made some really exciting announcements in this vein, but on the same unique opportunity for, in the right scenario, looking at behind the meter opportunities where you can grow very rapidly. Because we don't want to do all this work on the subsurface, on the surface for conversion, and then be sitting there. Capital doesn't like uncertainty, and capital also doesn't like waiting for returns. We need to make sure we solve all three of these challenges, these topic areas simultaneously.
And that, I imagine, is quite the significant challenge. There are a couple things that I wanna dig into with that answer specifically. On, the first point about technology, I think we've covered a lot of the bases in terms of what we need to get to, this future where geothermal can play a more significant role in generation across the power system. I would love to talk now about some of the business angle. So you mentioned that, the ultimate goal here is to maximize net megawatts on the grid cost competitively. I'm curious what the role of the Department of Energy is sort of in concert, maybe with private industry, with private investment, knowing that this is an expensive endeavor. These things don't happen overnight, and they certainly don't happen without some dollars to back them up. So, how does DOE work sort of alongside or independently from some of the private investment that we have seen from industry interested in backing geothermal and, bankrolling some of these very expensive projects? What does that look like for your department?
Yeah, there's a few different ways that the Department of Energy can assist here, and probably best to think about it across the technology readiness level scale from one, being a new idea in the lab to nine commercially deployable. So if you start on the low side, one through three, we've got an incredible team in ARPA-E. That's the Advanced Research Projects for Energy. That's where the new ideas that are high risk, high reward, very little information, that's where they should be. Uh, we should also be thinking about partnering with our national labs. We have 17 national labs across the country who've been working on these topics for years, decades. We need to make sure that we're bringing those projects to the scientists, applying first principles, and solving those problems as quickly and efficiently as we can. We start sliding up that scale. We're now in the, call it 4 to 6 range. That's where a lot of our office grants will come into play and normally have some type of cost sharing, anywhere from 20 to 50%. And that's meant to help offset the technical risk associated with some of these trials, whether it be characterization trials or a new technology to understand the thermal decline that we talked about earlier. Maybe it's developing a tool, a high temperature tool that we need to increase the efficiency of the development. And then you slide to the far right side of the scale. We've got an incredible team led by Greg Beard in energy dominance financing, formerly the Loan Program Office. That's where we're looking to support technologies with relatively low cost of capital. So we've got a full spectrum of different tools and resources to support the industry across the full technology readiness level. One chance to plug a process we are actively developing. We've got centers of excellence. So the National Energy Technology Laboratory is part of our office. We have three sites: Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania; Morgantown, West Virginia; and Albany, Oregon. Morgantown has recently been christened our Coal Center of Excellence. Pittsburgh will be the Oil and Gas Center of Excellence. Albany, the Critical Mineral Center of Excellence. And we're in the final innings of planning the Geothermal Center of Excellence. And really, what that's meant to be is more so a person than a site. It's an opportunity for industry to have the one person to go to interact with on a specific technical topic area. And then that person at the center of excellence will be able to connect industry with the right lab, the right capabilities to go solve the problem at hand. Be on the lookout. We'll get that announcement out in the next few weeks. But again, we're at the service of industry. We want our American constituents to benefit from the incredible energy resource we have. So our job is to support innovation, drive costs down, and drive scale as rapidly as we can.
How would you say that all of this investment and infrastructure in geothermal is serving the administration's stated goal of energy dominance? How do those two interplay?
I think it's important to start by defining energy dominance. Again, we'll go back in the Wayback Machine 25 years ago. The US was the global leader in natural gas imports. We were a major importer of oil. We were reliant on other countries to provide our critical energy. I think one of the most important things a country can do is feed and fuel itself. And that's exactly what we're doing now. So because of the shale revolution, we quickly moved from energy reliant to energy independent. We continue to grow our energy production. We're now energy dominant, meaning that we have more than we need and we can ship energy to our allies, reduce the trade deficit. And it's really an incredible geopolitical tool for your president, your administration to be able to have more energy than you need, not rely on others for the critical energy that fuels our economy, provides the national security that we all get to enjoy as Americans. So how does geothermal contribute to that? The secretary's talked a lot about winning at AI. And AI, as you know, it's truly a revolution. There's not a lot of things that earn the term revolution. We have the shale revolution, industrial revolution. These are moments in time that completely transform the future. We're living in one right now with AI. And it's important not only from the department's perspective around what our Undersecretary of Science is doing, Dario Gil, with the Genesis mission. He's going to completely transform science, the way that problems are solved, the technology we use to solve these problems. I'm confident Dario Gale and his team, and in partnership with industry, will change the game in solving problems in the STEM umbrella. But equally important, or more important, is the national security component of what AI will do. We can't take second place because the country that leads in AI is going to be the global superpower from a military national security perspective. So it's absolutely critical that we provide the energy that these technologies, these hyperscalers require in order to run efficiently, to continue to solve the technical problems that we've been talking about throughout this discussion, but also to protect our country. We've seen bad actors attack the US in the past from a cyber perspective. And we know that winning in AI is going to provide the offensive weapons, the defensive weapons that we need to protect our country, protect our people, protect our infrastructure.
Yeah, and this conversation around what it takes to win this what has now sort of been dubbed the AI race, so much of it centers on the power that is required to make that happen. So with this idea of energy dominance, reducing, eliminating the need for energy reliance on the global stage, with that in mind, how do you think utilities might be best interpreting this the role of geothermal in solving this massive problem that is certainly falls on everybody's shoulders. But for an audience of primarily utility listeners, I'm curious how you might characterize the role that they could play in considering the role geothermal plays in this future of energy dominance and what it looks like, especially as it pertains to powering some of these hyperscalers that has become such a primary concern for our utility leaders out there.
First off, to our utilities, thank you for all you do. Especially in the last few months, there's been a lot of folks that have worked around the clock to keep the lights on for Americans. It's not an easy task, and the grid gets more complex by the day. In the early days, you had a known generation source. All of those generation sources were firm. They could ramp up and down, rain or shine, wind or not. Today, we now have so many different inputs that are intermittent. You've got batteries, you've got rooftop solar, you've got such a complex system for utility companies. I would say look at geothermal as that firming generation. Not only can it be there when you need it, there's also likely a storage component. So we're injecting tens of thousands of barrels per day per well. You scale it out to 100 plus wells, you're talking about a massive volume of fluid that can serve as a pseudo battery as well. So when you think about geothermal, first and foremost, it's available 24/7. I think that's one of the most important things. Our secretary frequently highlights the most important components of energy or characteristics of energy is that it's reliable, affordable, and secure. And we believe that geothermal can be all three of those things. So, from a utility perspective, know that reliability is so critical. Know that geothermal provides that, and know that there's some storage opportunities that can be integrated into the subsurface. Just the volume that you store in water. We talk net megawatts. Part of the consumption, the parasitic load, is the electricity consumed to run the pump to inject the water. If we know that every day at the same time there's going to be a spike in prices, what the operator could do is inject more water for the hours leading up to that. During that 2 hour price spike, we can stop injecting, stop consuming those electrons in the parasitic load. And the pressure built up in the subsurface will allow us to continue to produce the heat, convert it to electricity, but maximize the net megawatts sold. So for the utility companies, again, thank you for what you've done. I know you're fighting day and night to keep the lights on for Americans, and you're doing a great job of that. Look at geothermal as a Swiss Army. It's a incredible energy source that has flexibility. It's flexibility that our grid needs in a lot of areas.
Yeah, certainly. Now, with all of this, resurgence in interest and a sudden influx of news and financing and infrastructure being built in and around the geothermal space, I'm curious as we finish this conversation, how do you think about separating what might be part of a hype cycle versus something that feels real and long lasting? What's your take on this sudden influx of resurgence of interest that we are seeing from across industry?
It's a fair question. My last couple of years, I mentioned that at Devon Energy, when we were looking at these alternatives that leverage our core competencies, we went through the full list of options to do so. Really, an oil and gas producer is good at subsurface mapping, drilling wells, in our case, hydraulically stimulating wells, moving fluid. When you look at the opportunities in the energy addition space, they're quite limited. When you put the filter on that we need it to be cost competitive and at gigawatt scale, there's just not a lot of opportunities out there. So the fact that this has been going on for not just a year or two gives me a lot of confidence. It's usually hype cycles are short. We've seen quite a few hype cycles just in the last few years that have come and gone very quickly. Geothermal has not done that. It's in fact, it's been building to your point. Just what's happened in the last couple of months is truly tremendous. So I think the sustained buildup, the sustained increase in capital entering the market, the sustained increased demand for electricity, all builds up a lot of confidence. And also the experience. So there's a bias, but I think it's a relevant bias that's valuable in this case is we saw this play out. Those who have worked the shale revolution, we watched this play out. Some people ask the same question: is this a hype cycle? Are people just drilling the best few wells that are available in the country? Can this thing really scale? And the answer we know today was absolutely it can scale. It can take us from an importer to an exporter. It can take us from country on the decline to the world leader in oil and gas production. That experience in the unconventional revolution provides even more confidence that we can solve this problem too. If we do our job right, I tell the team all the time that we'll take geothermal out of the other bucket. You look at the energy stack, it's got wood and biomass, coal, oil, gas, nuclear, wind, solar, and then up on top, there's a little sliver on that energy stack that's been labeled other for years. And I'm confident that in partnership with industry, solving hard technical problems, focused on creating value, we'll take geothermal out of the other bucket and it will be a major contributor to the US power generation market.
Yeah, taking it out of the other bucket is such a great way to put it. My last question for you, do we have the workforce that we need to make this happen? You know, if this is sustainable, if this is something that could be on par with potentially the shale revolution, I imagine it's going to require quite the workforce. Do you think we have what we need in place right now? And if we don't, what do we do about it?
That's a great question. We have amazing people in America. And one thing that's happened in the shale revolution to drive the cost down is we've become more efficient. So I'm going to be very thoughtful. I'm going to say it so it doesn't get misinterpreted. Oil and gas have been Oil, gas, and coal have made up over 80% of our primary energy for 100 years and is going to continue to make up a massive source of our primary energy. So it is not going anywhere. But the workforce in oil and gas, specifically in the US for unconventionals, has become so efficient. An operation that 10 years ago would have required 20 engineers, geologists, is probably half of that or less. So that workforce who has developed the skill sets in the midst of the shale revolution, as the shale revolution continues to get more efficient, some of those people will naturally move into geothermal. In fact, most of the folks that are making waves right now in geothermal came out of oil and gas. So I think we have an existing workforce that can solve these problems, but we're also going to need to develop the next workforce. And that's anything from the subsurface geosciences to the top side managing the plants. We've seen a dramatic increase in demand for the technical know-how around electrical systems, interconnects, grid build out, trades. What's beautiful about this is we build it in America. We're drilling wells in America. We're employing Americans. We're building grid infrastructure, power plants. So we need the trades to be developed and encouraged to enter into this market as well. It's a long-winded way of saying we have great people who are getting the revolution started. We're going to need more. There's such a demand for this type of power. Firm, baseload, cost competitive, zero carbon emitting. I'm confident that the market's going to continue to demand this type of electricity, and it's going to result in an increase in opportunities for Americans to have high paying jobs.
Really wonderful. And you know, the utility listeners are no strangers to hearing the words make the most of what you've got. Sounds like we're going to do that with our workforce plus some. Great influx of really talented individuals, hopefully coming into the energy industry very soon. And with tech this interesting, opportunities this big, it's not hard to imagine why. So thank you so much for joining us today, Assistant Secretary Kyle Haustveit. I really appreciate you being here on Power Perspectives.
Thanks, Kinsey.
And thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in. If you have thoughts, feelings, questions, concerns, anything you want to chat about in terms of geothermal or anything that we covered today, you know where to find us on the Energy Central platform. And you can feel free to slide into my inbox as well, kinsey@energycentral.com. Thank you again for listening. Have a great day, and we will see you next time on Power Perspectives.